Okay, hello, welcome everybody. We have such an audience here. I'm tempted just to let the room, talk to each other. But we are really honored to have you all for this second installment of our New Books in Islamic Africa, sponsored by the Institute for Islamic Thought in Africa at Northwestern University. I am the new director of ISITA, and I'm joined here, honored to be joined here by also our associate director, Dr. Rebecca Sharaikes, whom you all know also. This is our second installment of the New Books in Islamic Africa series. ISITA has a number of different talks going on this year, different series. And another one is called The Spiritual Luminaries of Islamic Africa. And we will be having a talk about Usman Dan Fodio by the renowned American Sheikh Mohammad Sharif of Sankore Institute. And that will be February 5th, I believe. So look out for further invitations if you're interested. Our first book talk in the series of New Books in Islamic Africa was Kimberly Wortman's book on the Ibadi, the Society for the Righteous in East Africa. And now we're having this talk by the esteemed Dr. Wendell Marsh, and we will have a subsequent talk later on in the spring about the new book publication, Chronicles of Two West African Kingdoms. We'll be joined by Moro Nobili, Ali Jakite, and myself in Evanston in late April. So this is such an honor to have Dr. Wendell Marsh with us today. Many of you know him already, but just to do the honor of reading his bio, rehearsing his bio one more time, he's Associate Professor of African Literature and Philosophy at Mohammad VI Polytechnic University at Ben Guerir, Morocco. He researches and teaches at the intersections of African and diasporic intellectual history, comparative literature, religious studies, and the politics of knowledge production. He obtained his PhD from Columbia University in 2018 in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies and Comparative Literature. He was also a postdoctoral fellow at the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs at Northwestern University from 2018 to 2020, so we consider him part of the Northwestern Network. And he previously was Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Rutgers University in Newark from 2018 to 2024. So without further ado, Dr. Wendell Marsh, we'd love to hear more about your book. And I understand you're going to speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for questions. So
Yes,
thank you.
yes, yes. Thank you, Professor Wright. It is hard to imagine 25 years ago when ISITA was founded that the field of Islam in Africa would have the kind of work that is currently being done. And Africa's massive Arabic written heritage sat beyond the geographic and historical foci of academic philology, that tradition of textual scholarship, long plagued by the strategically interested representation of the non-West that Edward Said, of course, described as Orientalism. And so it's no small part that ISITA has played as an institution, along with several people on this call, like Louis Brenner, who I'm very humbled to have in the audience, but also Sean Henretta and of course the founder John Hunwick and just so many other people who have worked to grow this field. And so I'm really grateful for the invitation to talk about my book, Textual Life, Islam, Africa, and the Fate of the Humanities. ISITA, in this kind of pioneering role of developing the documentary base of the work we do in this field, has been so vital. And even as the work of documentation necessarily persists. All that being said, I'm very proud to be the first event in the 26th year under the direction of the new director, Professor Zachary Wright, who has been a quiet and steady force for the field. I think he is exactly what ISITA and the field needs in this moment of the field's consolidation. So, Zachary, thank you for the invitation and congratulations on the new role. I pray that this experience is a fulfilling one and that you continue to bring success to ISITA and the field more broadly. I believe there is much that our work has to offer in uncertain times in which the humanities and the university more broadly is said to be in crisis. And so I think that's really important, thinking about these institutional histories as a way of framing this book. And the first thing I want to say to really frame the book is really thinking about the space of intervention of this book. So if we think about the field of Islam in Africa, you know, especially as it related to the Arabic written heritage, the earliest period was about cataloging and preserving and creating resources and references, right? Such as Hunwick's Arabic Literature of Africa and Charles Stewart's and eventually Bruce Hall's work on the U.S. African Arabic manuscript database. Then there was a middle phase that was a mix of large scale surveys and along with exploitation of documents for historical reconstruction. But more recent work, and I think I'm a part of this recent trend that has can be described as a hermeneutic turn in the study of this written heritage. And the key question in now is, you know, what are the meanings and value of these Arabic texts that have received so much attention from foundations and media outlets? And the way I like to think about this hermeneutic term as being defined by two tendencies, one more or less historical in its interests in the way it understands meaning, and the other religious. And when we think about this historical trend, I describe it as a new contextualism. So if we think about older kind of classically historicist works that would use a document to extract information, data to reconstruct the past, the new contextualists say that the meaning is to be found in the ways that a text intervenes into its context, right? And I think the figure that really represented this opening was Paulo Farias, of course, but there are many others who have come in the stream afterwards. On the other hand, you have the religious meaning. You have scholars interested in religious meaning. And so those scholars are interested in the ways that texts are able to represent and help us understand Islamic forms of life. And so meanings to be understood in relation to that, and especially into normativity, Islamic normativity. And these are really important and valuable interpretive frameworks that have really enriched our field. Uh, and I've learned a lot from them. And even I think my dissertation, which was a focus study of one work by Sheikh Musa Kamara, was very much in the kind of new contextualist vein. But um, as I've developed my work, what I've noticed is that both of these tendencies take for granted that their task as forms of knowledge production are about performing the work of representing reality in rigorous and systematic ways that reflect sound social scientific methodology. But how are we to make sense of these two very different kinds of meaning and value alongside each other? Moreover, are not the texts being interpreted not already their own representations of reality? It seems to me that we need a field, or at least a part of the field, that places the question of representation at the center of the enterprise, one that offers a reflection on texts as objects that invite appreciation, interpretation, and criticism. If only we had an African philology that mobilized the sophistication of textual scholarship, liberated from the burdens of colonial representation. my book, Textual Life, offers such a philology. One way of getting deeper into the work itself is discussing the title a little bit. So there are kind of three meanings of textual life for me, which signal an entire network of concepts and ideas that I was wrestling with. The first is kind of very simply a redescription of biography, textual life biography, right? The life writing, if you will. But in most disciplines, biography doesn't have a high status. It's not taken very seriously as a form of knowledge. This presents a unique problem for our field where, alongside pedagogical texts, poetry, kind of biographical texts are highly represented in the body of Arabic writing in West Africa. Uh, Moreover, um, I'm interested in redescribing biography with the term textual life. I am trying to kind of clear out the sedimentation of the meanings that have accrued around our, modern Western notion of biography as referring to the kind of becoming subject, right? Secondly, textual life refers to a specific biography. تبشير الخائف الحيران وتذكيره بساعة رحمة الله الكريم المنن by Sheikh Musa Kamara, which translates to the announcement of the fearful and confused and his reminder of the breath of God's mercy. So Sheikh Musa Kamara was born in 1864 and perishes in 1945, and he was a Muslim scholar from northern Senegal, and he was a prolific author, most notably of a monumental history of West Africa, Zuhur al-Basatin, Fi Tarikh al-Sawadin. Of course, we have in the audience Said Buspina, who's one of the primary translators of the first volume of that work. But he was also an author of many other genres of Islamic learning. And he has steadily has returned across several generations as a key reference for thinking Senegal. However, he is unfortunately poorly known beyond specialists. Lastly, the third sense that I intend with the title Textual Life is really a normative claim about a life well lived, enriched by texts, at the same time as I understand texts are made more abundant through our appreciation of the lives that make them. So rather than being a comprehensive biography of Kamra or a systematic reception history of his works, I consider this book to be fundamentally a parable. Now, a parable is a narrative that operates on two levels, one simpler, one more complex, but it does so simultaneously to reveal analogies and connections that would otherwise be obscured. And it often has a moral. A tale of text, the story of Kamra, his life, his work, and his reception, as I explore in Textual Life, is an exemplary account of the durability of the textual attitude as a commitment to reading. So, as a scholar of global Black studies, trained in intellectual history, comparative literature, and post-colonial theory, I pursued something of a hybrid method. I performed close reading for the purposes of both periodization and the appreciation of form. I used a corpus of published works by and about Kamara, as well as archival documents, including the announcement, the autobiography, but also works such as Akhtar Agabin, or Most of the Would-Be Jihadists, recently translated to English by and by Lo, which challenges the validity of jihad in a modern context. Also, Kamara's biography of Hajj Omar Tal, the most delicious of the sciences and the tastiest of the news. And of course, parts of the history of the Blacks, the monumental history of Muslim West Africa, I also consulted the colonial surveillance file in Dakar and the Kamara collection, which, in addition to manuscript works, are a number of documents about Kamara and the kind of provenance of the manuscripts, which are quite interesting. I've also visited the private family collection in Gangle, Senegal, and visited and spoke extensively to members of the family in Gangle and in Nouakchott over the time I did my dissertation and thereafter. So, using this library and archive, I examined French and Arabic published works, and this is key, right? So I wasn't really working with manuscripts. I was working with printed works editions mostly. I examined these works from across late colonial, nationalist, and contemporary periods to ascertain shifting frameworks for understanding. So while the recent wave of works in the field has produced new readings of West African Arabic texts in their historical context and through their religious significance, I approach this body of work as literature. In attending to the shifting historical contexts that have conditioned Kamara's reception, I highlight the political stakes and the epistemological commitments that have made the reading of his work possible, but have limited its interpretation. Such an account is essential, even if insufficient for the exercise of reading. But what I have appreciated most about this work is that in doing it, I have cultivated my own textual attitude by reading Kamara, from learning from him, for whom transmission and commentary were as important as the kind of central text itself. These are enduring values for the future of the humanities. So, what is the textual attitude? Understand it as a commitment to expand and open texts, as opposed to boiling them down, reducing them, and extracting from them to be used for some other end. But I can probably show you what I mean better than I can tell you. This material comes from the first chapter, Beginnings, from the book. When Kamran was a little boy, before he reached the age of responsibility, he left home to live with the teacher and his teacher's wife, as if he were their son. One day, a beggar visited the home. Standing outside the door, he asked for alms. Kamara's teacher told Kamara to take the man food. Naked, the small boy took the beggar a bowl of millet. When the young Kamara turned around to return to his childly affairs in the house, the beggar followed him in, pulling back the curtain that blocked the view of the home's interior from the outside. The beggar asked, "Who is this boy? Is he your son or your student?" Kamara's teacher replied that the boy was his student. The beggar admonished the teacher not to beat the boy, as was typical for Quranic students receiving their first discipline of life, for the boy was a friend of God. The teacher scoffed at such a suggestion. This scene of election opens the body of Kamran's autobiography. It follows the brief justification for the potentially immodest act of writing about one's life and a brief paragraph on the author's genealogy. Placed so close to what is essentially the beginning of the textual representation of his life, the intextualized scene, both a memory of a past experience and something that has now taken narrative form, initiates the discussion of the text's central theme with a vivid account of Kamran's election. This is, in effect, the first proof of his argument put forward in the book. Kamran was indeed a wali, a friend of God, a Muslim saint. This had been known, identified, and foretold by an enigmatic figure who was marginal to social life. Read in generic terms, the trope of a wandering dervish in tattered rags that is central to the unraveling of a plot is certainly a convention in Sufi literature. This character type, not to mention this kind of actual historical person, emerged from the historical practices of asceticism associated with classical Sufism, which, according to one etymology, associates the Sufi with suf, or the roughly hewn wool that renunciates war. The social marginality of such a figure belies their position in a hidden spiritual hierarchy that Sufis have long theorized as providing God's guidance to humanity on a permanent basis. The beggar status, as someone with insight, was not apparent, but rather something hidden and easy to miss. And from this point, this position, as someone valuable but hidden, he could immediately see who it was that brought him the cereal, when even the teacher could not. What is this thing that even a learned teacher could not see, that only a person of spiritual insight could? What does Kamra narrate in an autobiography such as this? It is a bishara, or portent. Portents are objects of hagiographic representation and units of saintly narrative. They are the indication of good news, of glad tidings. They are signs that come from a degree of prophecy or announcements. Note here the title of the autobiography, Tabshir, shares a root with Bisharat. In the first chapter, Kamra relates these portents in the context of his youth, education, and travels, and records the indications of his election from his dreams and those of others. The story of the beggar opens this important chapter and establishes the force of his election as a wali. While Kamra's status as a friend of God might be understood as the straightforward point he is making, the takeaway, the bottom line, if you will, it is worth noting the textual quality of this portent as narrated in this work, which is of theoretical and conceptual interest for us for the ways it can teach us and not simply furnish information. Through a close reading of the announcement's introduction, in chapter one of the book, I arrived at a theorization of text as a form of human intention that exceeds communication. And perhaps in the Q&A, I can talk more about that. So by textual, I mean the excessive significance of a work beyond its function of being a source of information. Beyond being evidence in his argument for wilaya or sainthood, I understand this scene to be chiefly concerned with representing what Kamra understands of the textual attitude, the patient pursuit of insight, the looking into the meaning of signs in the text of creation. We might consider this with two different literary frameworks in mind, Sufi poetics and ancestral African narrative. Sufi hermeneutics relies on the distinction between the apparent or manifest, zahir, and the inward or hidden, batin. Interpretation becomes a matter of looking to what is on the surface of things in order to go beyond it or beneath it to find what is hidden inside. In much of Sufi literature, the image of the veil or the curtain becomes an important metaphor for that which separates the apparent and the hidden. In his magnum opus of the doctrines and practices of the Tijaniya Sufi order, the Senegalese Tijani leader, Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, uses, for example, the metaphor in the title Kashf al-Ilbas. According to Zachary Wright in his translation of this work, this title literally means the removal of clothing or garb, but it is understood.
Attention, attention. En raison d'un incident technique dans notre bâtiment, nous vous prions d'évacuer les locaux. Veuillez vous rendre aux portes de sortie de secours. Attention, attention. Because of a technical hitch in our building, we ask you to evacuate the premises. Please go to the emergency exits.
Okay. If y'all can give me 3 minutes, I can come back.
Attention, Attention.
Okay, well, that was interesting. We're all in institutions that have to be evacuated once in a while. So, um, any thoughts so far that anybody wants to share? Questions they want to give a draft of before we actually ask the presenter?
Richard Joseph.
Yes, Professor
One,
Joseph, welcome. Yeah.
greetings, Zachary, and greetings, all of you. As you all know, I'm a great lover of ISITA
Mm.
and its scholars, whole community. But I was just thinking as I was listening, uh, since he's talking about history and biography and texts and narratives, there was a moment when I was director of the Program of African Studies, and there was a conversation about ISITA. At that time, I thought of it as moving on to become the Institute for the Study of Islam in Africa. And there were discussions that took place, and Rebecca came back and informed me that, in fact, the group had decided they wanted to stay with the Zeta. So, a confession, I thought, this is an opportunity here. I've given it. But as I was listening to Wendell, I was thinking, oh my goodness, what a wonderful decision that was. And I'll stop there. And every word I'm hearing from him is just reinforcing the idea of no, no, this incredible wealth, would have been lost within all the other stuff. So thank you. Just an intervention.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure Wendell would love to hear that when he comes back. If you're just joining us, Professor Wendell Marsh had to be evacuated from his building where he was giving the online talk, but he promised us to be back in 3 minutes. And we are trying out on each other questions or comments we might pose to him when he does come back. Yeah.
I just have a brief comment, and hi everybody, Paul Naylor.
Welcome,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, it's just a very exciting time. I mean, aside from let's just forget about what's going on in the United States in terms of humanities, but for the field, it is an exciting time because you have all these books coming out that, as Wendell said in his introduction, are not just unpackaging and extracting text, but they're really engaging with text from West Africa. And I'm thinking, Zachary, of your work, with Mara Nobili and Ali Diakite, when you really, sort of really put these two historical chronicles, unpack them, put them in context. I'm thinking of Shamble Jeffy's book, Writing Timbuktu, and I feel it's very exciting now that we've got to the stage of understanding, what is there and the richness of the written heritage. Now it turns to academics and others to sort of, okay, let's now read them. John Hunwick was all about collecting. Of course, he engaged with a certain number of texts as well, but of course, it was mainly about the collecting and to see what's there. And now it's very exciting to see the natural progression of scholars actually engaging with these texts at the level of the text. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I would second that. I was remembering from, just reading through once you do separate the Tariq al-Fatash, the 19th century interlopations from the original Tariq ibn Mukhtar, and then you see these crazy stories about the descendants of certain people, explaining the enslavability of certain people that the Alhamdulillah Caliphate wanted to enslave by their origin from, bathing in a river that was a wet dream of a giant. And you see that these are just crazy stories that never really fit within the original text. But then I think if you don't come back with this interpretive lens, you're really like lost. It is really helping you kind of think further about what people were trying to do with the text. Of course, it's not just about saying that the text is we want to get rid of it. it's actually telling us very interesting things about what people were trying to do in the 19th century with those texts based upon these earlier versions. But so I guess that would be my question for Wendell when he comes back is, or if anybody has a better version of this, but what are the specific questions that we can be asking of texts or sources more broadly that would kind of bring that interpretive or coalesce that interpretive gaze? Okay, here's Wendell. He's back. Wendell, are you back?
Hello.
Oh, you're there. Okay, great.
Yeah. Sorry about that. We will, if it's okay, continue. You might hear the alarm in the background, but I am at a safe distance, so no worries there. I won't linger too long, but as I was saying, in the example of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse and the poetic work that is also a doctrinal work, the metaphor of a kind of clothing, of cloth, of separation, is this core metaphor, right? And Niasse deploys this in a context of a polemically charged debate, a Sufi, anti-Sufi debate. So the can you hear me? Okay. The Sufi path and its techniques of self-cultivation through the annihilation of the ego become an important means of lifting the veil. So the beggar, and to go back to the scene that we're considering, is itself a conventional representation of the classical ascetic Sufi, and that he passes through the curtain that separated the outside of the house from the inside symbolizes this capacity to gain insight, to look into the real but hidden nature of things. Outside the house, the boy is just a boy, but inside he's revealed as a friend of God. The use of Sufi imagery in this portent, read in its generic context, shows that it is not simply the fact of Kamara's election that matters, but also its form. This literary quality of the Bishara is most noticeable when read not just for its meaning, but also with an appreciation of its form. So the other dynamic or the feature of this particular story that we get in Kamara's autobiography is its contemplative nature. The depiction of a scene of election the layering of this significance amounts to an invitation for contemplation. If we read the text simply as a fact or an event that happened, we miss what the text does. It compels readers to consider the meaning of the scene and how it is achieved, working out for themselves what it is that they are to understand. This, in part, is what I mean by the textual attitude. The contrast between the two figures in the scene is evocative of this. The teacher, who was the first to teach the boy Musa the alphabet and parts of the Quran, contrasts with the beggar. The teacher represents a superficial knowledge transmitted from one to another as if it were a command. Learn these letters, memorize these verses, give the man the food. The beggar represents deeper insight that cannot be learned. It's God-granted knowledge that is revealed through the process of disciplined contemplation. Importantly, the insight offered by the beggar is rejected by the knowledgeable teacher, who scoffs when he is told that the boy is a friend of God. In representing his own election in such a way, Kamara invites readers to contemplate for themselves, rather than accepting what is observable on the surface of things and passed on through transmission. This scene thus represents an image of an authentic African Sufism that offers a considerable contrast with the stereotype, as common today as it was in the colonial period and associated with the theory of Islam noir, of adherents who were completely gullible when faced with charismatic figures. As a humanistic tradition, Sufism, as represented in the story of the beggar, is an important resource for cultivating the capacity for individual contemplation. Now, in what I had prepared, but I've lost a bit of time, I also read this scene along the lines of ancestral African oral narrative and seek to kind of reconcile them as resources for meaning making that is at Kamran's disposal. For the sake of time, because I really want to have some conversation with you all, I'm going to skip that part and kind of come to a kind of summary here. So my argument is not that West African Islam was or is syncretic, nor that it was or is normative, as the conventional preoccupations of defining religion might want us to determine. Nor am I concerned with the historicity of this particular scene. I'm interested in how the diversity of resources for making meaning have come to shape a West African textual attitude. Against the proclivity to view African Muslim literacy as an exception, I insist that the textual attitude is not simply Muslim or a product of a written culture per se, rather as an orientation toward knowledge. The textual attitude reflects a long-held symbiosis. It is not unique to Muslim West Africa or even to Muslim contexts more broadly. Rather, the textual attitude is the classical orientation toward knowledge that has not originated in a particular religion or place, but has developed along different trajectories globally. The first portent in Kamara's autobiography, represented by the disclosure of the marvelous beggar, reflects this textually inflected preoccupation with contemplation that developed from both ancestral African and Islamic African thought. So to read Kamara appreciatively is to understand how he made sense of the world through such contemplation, textual study. And here I want to wrap up by asking the question, how do we cultivate a textual attitude and make the value of texts such as Kamara's autobiography more apparent? Today, the Kamara family, led by Basiru Kamara as the family's Khalif and guardian of manuscripts, is leading the effort to appreciate Kamara. And Senegalese scholars such as Abdul Malal Diop and Mohammad Said Ba have contributed to developing the Kamara Research Center in Gangel to support further work on Kamara. And by Lowe at Duke has published the first English translation of Akhtar Ragabin. Separately, Said Bousbina, who I'm very happy to have in the audience with us, has recommitted to producing a translation of Kamara's monumental work. In addition to my book, forthcoming work of Area Market Sales, Sadie Jamil Nyan at IFON and David Owen, and I'm sure others, is beginning to fill out the space of a robust area of research. This area, however, is not narrowly about one Muslim scholar who lived on the edge of French Empire. And given Kamara's importance in the development of the field, his work is actually ideal for asking much broader questions. So for this reason, I have begun to work with Bousbina in thinking about a sort of Kamara portal. And I hope many of you to join us in developing a collaborative scholarly initiative tentatively titled the Kamara Portal, a digital philology of West African Islamic thought. And Rebecca, if you can put up that slide with the QR code and also drop in the link to the chat for me, I would appreciate that. So the project responds to a long unfinished effort that Kamara began when he struggled to publish a bilingual Arabic-French edition of Zuhul Bassatin, or what I call History of the Blacks, and that many scholars have since taken up over generations to make the work available in multiple languages. The portal brings together, will hypothetically, potentially bring together not only digitized images of manuscripts, machine readable Arabic and transliterations and versions in English and French, but all of those witnesses would be linked across language and formats, conceived not only as a repository, but as an aperture for seeing an entire life world. In all of its epistemological, ontological, and theological dimensions, it offers a structured entry point into a broader tradition of African Islamic thought, including historical reconstruction, legal reasoning, ethical and political reflection, and engagement with classical sources. By translating Kamra's writing into a structured digital data, texts that function simultaneously as manuscripts, editions, and databases, the portal will extend philological practice into new analytical and comparative registers without abandoning its commitments to historical context and close reading. So I've put a form if you're interested in joining this effort by contributing perspectives, leads on manuscripts, technical know-how, or just curious to keep up with the project, please fill this out. Your information would only be used in relation to this project and not as spam for other purposes. So in closing, I just want to say that we would be mistaken to succumb to the anxiety invoked by the so-called crisis of the humanities. The mistake is of two kinds. The first would be to reduce the humanities to simply being a set of subjects that exist in the university. The humanities have never been contained within the university. They have always existed in the radical abundance of life beyond it. The second mistake is to forget that the inherent nature of knowledge is fragility. Instead, we should understand the humanities as the cultivation of the textual attitude and interpretive orientation towards the world, despite and maybe because of this risk of loss and vulnerability. And we should remember, despite this fragility, returning to the text is possible. If the humanities have a real value, it is to be found in this commitment to read again. Is this not one of the classical etymologies of religion, or relegere, to read again? As long as we learn from Kamran this commitment to return to the text, to practice philology, and to love study, the fate of the humanities remains full of promise. Thank you.
All right, okay, wonderful. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. And I think you inspired us all. I just want to take the liberty of asking the first question. If you can just imagine us, PhD students that are studying with you, they have a certain text that they want to work on. And I interpret your invocation of the text here, I think, to be narrative more broadly, understanding that human identity is wrapped up in some form of narrative, whether that's fossilized in a text or in another type of oral narrative. What are the questions then that we need to be asking of our sources, of our texts, of our narratives, of our oral histories, that can produce the type of attention to textual representation that you want to urge us to do?
I really love that question because it gets us right into the method, right? And my immediate response to that is the questions aren't predetermined, right? That what I have learned in my years as a student of literature is that in studying the form of a text itself, you understand that the text presents its own questions. That you have to be kind of patient and curious, and to sit with the text and allow it to pose its own questions. And that's really hard, even as someone who went into graduate school to study literature, who took, advanced literature classes, but who didn't find necessarily a lot of people with whom I could study the kinds of texts I was interested in from that perspective. When I got to the text I was interested in, I still ended up kind of reproducing a more or less historical reading of Eshal Ulum by Sheikh Musa Kamara, for example, right? In the dissertation, I had yet to really pose these kinds of questions that I think are that we need to open up. And what it required was two things ultimately. One, as I was finishing the project, I was in Senegal and I was meeting with Abdul Malal Diop, who's written a wonderful dissertation on Kamara, very extensive, was very important for my own work. And I was presenting him some very complicated arguments about this one particular text, and he had suggested to me, start with Textual Life, this autobiography, right? So he directed me to kind of a place to start, and it was exceedingly kind of difficult to make sense of. At the same time, R.A. Judy, who's in comparative literature, author of Disforming the American Canon, wrote on the Bilali manuscripts of Sapelo Island, Georgia. He kind of coached me through a way of reading, a method of reading that the text itself suggested for it, right? That the text give us instructions for how to read them. And it's a kind of a slow process, but it's the one worth our time and effort.
Thanks for that. Okay. Any further questions from the audience?
Question, as a matter of fact. Hello, everyone. Brian Maxey here, PhD in candidate, Toronto. Thank you, Wendell. This was fantastic to hear. It was actually like one of the practical questions that we kind of all alluded to as we embark on this kind of work. And that is, as we try to engage these questions moving forward, I hate to do the thing where it's like the landscape of our future students and or us in terms of the language skills to even do this work moving forward and the resources kind of slowly dwindling away, maybe not so slowly anymore, as we kind of like see this expansion in this field, the capacity to kind of like sustain this area of study, at least within some of the institutions in the US. Yeah, how do we kind of like keep this trajectory and grow it for the next phase of scholars as some of the things that maybe we had access to kind of rapidly go away? And just thinking of it in terms of like exciting work, how do we keep growing it as more of a just thinking forward question?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really important. And at scale, I don't know how to answer that question. And I'm really hopeful that people like Professor Wright will lead us in ways of figuring that out. But individually, the path I'm pursuing is looking elsewhere.
Okay.
I'm in Morocco now, there are resources in other places or people who are more invested in the parts of the world that we're interested in. And I know that's not like a structural solution for everyone, but I do think there's I mean, look, the end of American empire that we're watching isn't like necessarily a bad thing. And there's a growing diversity of possibility to build and make the world we want to see and live in. And so, that might mean that the Department of Education isn't funding our language study. It might mean that, we take it a little bit more to the grassroots. Maybe that means that, it's maybe not as well structured and funded. I mean, I say this as someone who received almost every fellowship and scholarship that the government provided. Like I wouldn't have learned the languages that I've learned and the experiences I've had without it. And so I don't mean to like trivialize it, but yeah, we're in a different horizon, and we got to experiment. Like I don't know that my path is the answer right now, but we got to try stuff. and see, what's going to work and what won't, because the rules are different now.
So one question in the chat here
Yeah.
from Dr. Farah Sharif says, how does your work engage that of Professor Rudolph Wehr's on the transference of knowledge in core texts and rituals as embodied in people?
Yeah. So after the book was published, ironically, I realized that the title of my book was an impoverished version of the Walking Quran. Uh, and that was a humbling moment when I realized that in some ways I was trying to say something that had been said in a much more forceful way. And so I think Professor Ware's work is indispensable. I've learned a lot from it, and when I talk about textual life, I'm not trying to isolate text and textual engagement as being like this rarefied thing that is an ideal. At the same time, I'm trying to highlight the ways that a part of the world that is not associated with textual learning is evidently so. And I think that textual knowledge, textual scholarship is its own really important mode of engaging the world. And it's one that I'm invested in. So I don't think it's, like conflicts with that argument, but it maybe has a different horizon or is interested in some different questions.
Okay, so Zachary Wright had to step out to join another meeting, so I'm in charge now. So do we have another question from the audience, or if you prefer to type your question in the chat, can do that as well, and I'll read it. Let me go.
I see this one from Jamil El-Razi that says that I made the statement that autobiographies were not considered a true academic of work, and to explain on that. So I said that biography in general isn't a privileged kind of form of knowledge in most disciplines, right? So if we take history, for example, I think it's not stretched to say that biography is a lesser valued way of doing history, right? If you're a professional historian and you say you're writing a biography, most serious historians might look at you with a side eye. And also I think even in literary studies, if your work is really on a single figure as opposed to a method of interpretation or some theoretical concern, it's not valued in the same way in general, right? And so what I'm trying to point out is a consistent problem that I think our field has had, in that the materials that we have are either illegible to other fields, or to the extent that it is legible, is not really seen as important. And so by reframing the question of biography and what it is by kind of restating it as textual life, I'm trying to kind of blow out the sedimented associations that it has. I hope that counts as an explanation for Dr. El-Razi, but let me know if there's another way to clarify. In the meantime, I see another question from Safa Khatib. Can you talk more about the tension between intention and communication, and how we can be sensitive to the ways that intention exceeds communication? Thank you for this. it is core to my understanding of text. So communication, right? If we think of like communication theory, is there is a message that is sent by a speaker and then the receiver of that message. And the whole point of communication is to reduce the amount of noise to maximize the signal, right? But more or less, there's a one-to-one relationship between what is sent and what is received, ideally. And this is, when it comes to a text, though, is an impoverished understanding what happens in a text. A text does a lot more than that, right? A text, as Karen Barber might say, are things, say things, and do things. And so when we take all of that together, it exceeds the task of communication. Communication just becomes one level. And if we want to retrieve the abundance and the wealth of we have to explore these other layers and features of what these texts are doing.
Okay. We have another question from Amadou Sani. What's the status of Ajami text tradition in local and translocal scholarship in this age of digital humanities? I think this could be our last question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, I'm familiar with a lot of conversations around, Ajami. It's not so much, hasn't been my focus, but I would say in general, thinking about Arabic script work and this broader tradition of Arabic script heritage, what we have to do is think about using the technologies at our disposal to appreciate, to enrich these traditions, right? So I'm talking really visualizing the kinds of relationships that are represented from geographic place names and connecting to citations, really visualizing the intertextual networks between the text and their reference, et cetera. And so if you're interested in some of those questions, I suggest, Rebecca, could you put the link of the Google form again? If you're interested in some of these questions, I think they're big questions that no one scholar can kind of give an answer to, but we kind of need a space where we're actively thinking about the questions. What Mobley's been doing, his Maktaba, we can do more, and I really hope that we do it together.
I see another question here, and since we did lose some time with the I think we'll continue on if you're okay with it. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you want to read it? It's from Mohammad Nasir.
Yeah, so about the coinage of Black liberation philology, to shed more light on it. So I talk about this in something called the overture of the book, and how does it connect to the growing trend of decolonizing the humanities. So Black liberation philology for me refers to a kind of specific part of kind of African and African diasporic thinking that are very much interested in the study of language and textual scholarship as a form of knowledge in its own right. I connected from Phyllis Wheatley, all the way through Malcolm X, who in his autobiography is very explicit for his appreciation of philology as a form of knowledge. And as I start to argue in that overture, that I think philology holds his theory of diaspora. And this is an idea that I'm continuing to explore, and I have a forthcoming article called The Philological Imagination of Malcolm X, where I'll kind of work on laying that out. And I think it is connected to decolonizing the humanities, insofar as such a movement helps us understand that the colonial rule was only an episode, and that there are traditions of learning that were in development before colonial rule, and that people are returning to and creating anew. And I also see another question. I give an expansive way of thinking Black life through textuality. How do you see your project relating genealogically to earlier intellectual traditions that worked explicitly on the global horizon, like Black and Du Bois? Yeah, thank you for this question. As I point out in the overture of the book, the overture is a kind of weird thing in this book. It's too long to be a preface. It actually includes some substantive thinking, but it was really needed to set the stage of where this book sits in between fields and disciplines, right? It very much comes out of a intellectual formation, mine, that is deeply immersed in Black thought, questions that emerged when I was at the historically Black college, Morehouse, and Blyden, someone who's a central referent, right? When Blyden writes in Islam, Christianity, and the Negro Race, he mentions Hajj Omar Tal as an example of the African personality. And, that's really how I got into all this. So it's absolutely connected. I really appreciate this engagement. I'm really sorry for the disruption of the alarm, but I am so pleased that you all stayed with me, and we got to continue the conversation. And I hope the conversation continues, and I hope to have your information in the forum, so that we can develop the Kamara portal.
Okay. Thank you so much, Wendell, for such an inspiring talk. We do look forward to engaging with you further. And if anyone needs the link to the form and you didn't catch it in the chat, you can email me or ISITA or Wendell, of course. And I put information about our next talk, which is February 4th, in the chat. So I hope to see some of you again. Thank you so much. Bye.